Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar in the ACPE and Transforming Chaplaincy Strategic Thinking Gathering. We are going to be in conversation today with Hanci Newberry, Imani Jones, and Steve Kalister from The Ohio State University. They are respectively ACP Supervisor, Director of Chaplaincy, a Manager of Chaplaincy, and an Administrator. And they are going to talk with us about strategic planning for chaplaincy staff and services expansion, a roadmap to success, talking us through what their experiences were, what their advice is, and suggestion. They're going to talk for a little bit of time. While they're talking, if you have questions to share, I encourage you to please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type your question in there. I will be able to see the questions, and after they finish with their presentation, I'll do my best to ask them as many of your questions as I can. If you want to open your chat screen, so again at the bottom, if you click on the little chat box, we can have some sort of sidebar conversations, and I will try my best to pull questions out of the chat box as well. But let's, to begin, focus our questions in the Q&A. Last time I tried to do it in both places, and it was a little bit dizzying. So thank you all so much for being with us. We're really excited to hear from you and learn with you, and you can take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Hello, everybody. I'm Hanci Newberry, Director of Chaplaincy at the Wexner Medical Center. We're all very honored to be with you today and to be asked to participate in this series. I'm going to start us off by first showing you a little bit, telling you a little bit about our medical center. So this slide tells you a bit about the size and the scope of Wexner Medical Center at Ohio State University. We're a large academic medical center, about 1,300 beds. And we're a level 1 trauma center. We also have a National Comprehensive Cancer Center, which includes the James Cancer Hospital and the Solove Research Institute. Photo down on the left side shows our medical center campus, where 6 of our hospitals are located on the Ohio State campus. The photo up at the top right is our University Hospital East, which is located a few miles away, just east of the downtown Columbus area. And our chaplaincy department provides spiritual and pastoral care services to all of these hospitals, and then also to several of the cancer-related ambulatory clinics in our health system. So we started a strategic planning process for our department in January of 2014. And it was because of the following challenges. We had inadequate, very thin staffing, given the size and scope of our medical center. We felt we had very inadequate after-hours coverage, mostly consisting of 1 chaplain resident, the poor soul, who was on call in the building for all 6 of our medical center campuses at one time. And then we had a separate person on call from home for the East Hospital. But given the scope, given the acuity of our hospital, the complexity of care, this was a very challenging on-call shift. You can appreciate that. Also, our CPE programming was limited due to only having 2 CPE supervisors, one of which was a department director, again, of this large academic medical center, whose ability to supervise the capacity was very limited due to the pressing duties of administration. We felt we had poor connection to community clergy. We knew they came and visited their parishioners or the persons in their faith community, but we rarely saw them, just again, given the size of our medical center. There weren't natural opportunities or programs that would enable us to meet them and come together. For a pastoral care department in an academic medical center, we were not doing research, which, you know, you can appreciate would be a bit of a problem given that everyone else is engaging in that in some way. And as a department, we were not asked to provide any metrics to measure what we did and report them up to senior leaders. So since it wasn't asked of us, we weren't doing it. And then finally, we had limited, our chaplain staff had limited visibility and engagement beyond the bedside care. They were not involved in projects, initiatives, nor too many ability to have engagement in committees. this is a snapshot of what we looked like in January of 2014 with regard to our staff. And again, as you can see, one director who was also CPE supervisor, one person devoted entirely to CPE as program manager, an administrative assistant, 7.75 staff chaplains, 8 contingent staff, mostly serving kind of holes in our on-call shifts, and 5 year-long CPE residents. Our other CPE program was simply primarily a summer internship, so they were only there a very limited time. But again, the main point of this is if you go back to that first slide and where the photos were, think again about the complexity of care, the scope of our service that we're expected to provide. This amount of staff who are actually doing the hands-on care was just very inadequate and very limited. Before we start talking about the story, as well as the strategic planning process, I wanted, as a CPE supervisor of 25 years and a department director, to talk with you a little bit about what I think I'm aware of around barriers in our CPE world and our pastoral care world to our leaders thinking strategically and maybe even feeling confident to engage in such a strategic planning process as we did. And I speak entirely from my own experience here, but also from folks I've talked to over the years, I think might ring true for many of you. I have no formal business education or experience. As I've often joked with my colleague, Steve Kalister, who will be coming up here in a minute, I don't have the MBA, so there's just so much that's kind of foreign to me in terms of background and knowledge around business. For those of us who become department leaders, my experience again is that the education one gets is a do-it-yourself project. Either I read something on my own to try to shore up, my knowledge, or perhaps the medical center or hospital has provided some kind of education program around management skills or business, but that typically is fairly practical and sort of a, just-in-time learning for something that's happening. As a CPE supervisor, before I became a department director, I really didn't know anything about what it really meant to be in leadership. I didn't know the stresses and the strains and the challenges that a department, a pastoral care leader would have. So since I didn't have that experience, it really wasn't anything I was teaching and being able to offer to CPE students. Also, I think in the pastoral care community, there is a bit of a question, at least that I experience, which is the ministry of administration or leadership valued as real ministry? Those of us in chaplaincy sometimes feel that way as we are, compared, if you will, to our colleagues in the parishes. But I think in my role now as a director of pastoral care, sometimes I think that my colleagues look at me more with pity around how many meetings I've gone to and how many pieces of paper I had to push that day, rather than really seeing what I'm doing as ministry. Also, we know our agenda for pastoral care. We know its value. Sometimes we're frustrated, I think, that senior leaders don't really intuitively recognize all that we could offer and the value of our chaplains. But at the same time, I'm not sure we always understand our senior leaders' challenges and concerns that might limit what they can always do for us. Also, do we speak the language of senior leaders that's needed to make requests of additional services to staff? I think often we just really don't know how to make our case in a way that will really make the difference in them either understanding what we have to offer or being able to offer. And then finally, I think we wonder if our CPE and pastoral care concepts can even translate into something like a strategic planning process. And I am going to sort of have the point of view here, I think as we all do, here that yes, indeed, what we are engaged in a strategic planning process is very similar to what we do, for example, in CPE, which ultimately our goal is to improve, right? To improve and grow, in one instance, a person and their skills, in our instance, a department. With that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Steve Kalister.
Thank you, Hanci. That was a terrific introduction. Let me just grab the mouse here. Okay, so strategic plans are often necessary to establish where a team should go, its priorities, and how best to get there, its focus. To me, it all comes down to choices. What are the top priority goals, and what limited set of strategies are most likely to achieve them? Typically, we like to see 2 to 4 strategies per goal, and not a lot more. And the reason is that it needs to remain sustainable, realistic, and we can't do everything. I'm curious, how many of you are struggling with these same factors that caused us to pursue a strategic plan here at OSU? I'll guess quite a few. In organizations today, successfully vying for limited resources often requires a strategic plan. Strategic plans signal that the team spent the time required to work through a disciplined and rigorous process. The process uses various information sources and analyses that Imani will describe to you next. Frankly, with a strategic plan, you are so much better prepared to recruit an executive champion who's going to tell your story and advocate for resources from the organization. You'll hear more about this from one of our executive leaders in just a few minutes. And lastly, consider that donors will also appreciate the virtues of a strategic plan prior to giving a major gift. Next, I'd like to help you get comfortable with this concept of strategic planning. I think that it's often used as a buzzword, right? It makes us sound smart and almost elite at times. It really can get up there, but at its core, it's not rocket science at all, and there are some core components that really are all you need to get started with strategic planning. To start out, it's really important to understand the enterprise's mission, vision, and values. Right? It's simply inappropriate to develop a strategic plan or put forward a strategic plan that is not consistent with those. From there, we talk about the external and internal analysis, and this is really looking pretty fundamentally at what are the factors on the outside of the organization, the opportunities that we want to capitalize on, the threats that maybe we want to mitigate. We can't control them because they're not internal to us, but we can at least try to work around them. And then internally, what are our strengths, again, to leverage, and our weaknesses that maybe we can fix? We take these first 3 elements, and then we identify the top priority goals. And this is the what. What are we trying to do? There's lots of different things we can do, but what makes the most sense to pursue? And then from there, we get into the best strategies and tactics. These are the how. How are we going to try to pursue those goals? And strategies and tactics are really the same thing, but tactics are just much more granular. And I'll give you an example here. Looking at the breast cancer program where I come from, the goal that we've had on a past strategic plan was to increase the number of unique patients seen at the breast center by 40% over 5 years. So that tells us pretty specifically the what. What are we trying to accomplish? It doesn't say anything about how we're going to do it. Now, the strategy, or one of the strategies, is to focus on improving patient access to the breast center, right? So now I'm starting to unwrap the how. Okay, I'm going to improve the access. I got it. But they didn't tell me much specifics. And that's where we get into the tactics. A supporting tactic for this strategy was to ensure appropriate physician staffing to accommodate the growth. Okay, now I'm getting it, right? It's a little more specific on exactly what needs to be done to bring that strategy to life and ultimately work towards that goal. Then lastly, here are this concept of monitoring, metrics, a dashboard. Sometimes you'll hear this term, again, a fancy term, balanced scorecard, which simply means a robust or comprehensive set of metrics. And the reason this is so important is because a strategic plan is just that, it's a plan. It's not reality. Reality is going to differ, and so we need metrics to tell us what do we need to do to course correct the plan? What should we maybe abandon because it's simply not working? What should we do more of because it's working really well? So that's where metrics comes in as a vital part. And it's really important to try to establish that up front in the strategic planning whenever possible. Here are some other basics of strategic planning that I wanted to unpack briefly. One is, this concept of a consistent core. So those items I just went through, that's what you're going to find across, a multitude of organizations and different strategic planning processes. The templates, however, so literally the slide decks or the forms that you fill out and some of these fancy terms, those are going to vary, and that's okay. We need to just focus on the core, kind of see through the trees, if you will. And I'll give you an example in my next slide. So a few key acronyms, and again, these can intimidate or throw people off balance a little bit, but they needn't. One is the SWOT. This is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And just a grid of those factors that we talked about previously. SMART goals are often mentioned. These are goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. You can Google that and see more of the minutia there, but again, not rocket science. And then return on investment, or ROI. This simply says, what are we going to get for the resources that we put in? There's a few financial terms that are worth knowing. Budget can be used in a couple ways. To me, it always means expense budget, our costs, but others will use it not uncommonly as our plan. So our revenue budget, or our overall budget, which can include both revenues and expenses. Margin is our profit. So what's the difference between our revenues and our expenses? Fiscal year refers to the financial year. Sometimes these are in line with the calendar year. Oftentimes they're not. Ours here at OSU, for example, is July 1st to June 30th. The process of strategic planning is not trivial, and it usually takes us 6 to 12 months, sometimes longer, but that's probably the typical frame. It's important to use, very important to use the organization's template and process. And the reason is that you want your work product to be recognized and its value appreciated. And when you're using something that's from the outside, you're risking both of those. So leverage the credibility that comes from the template and the process that the organization has. And then be inclusive. The people who are going to live this plan, carry it forward, should really be included in developing it. They're going to have insights, number one. Number two, their buy-in is going to be a lot stronger if they have a hand in the making. And then senior leaders, they need to know what you're doing, how you're getting it done, and need to have an opportunity to provide feedback before the plan becomes finalized. This is our process here at OSU, and this, the more I looked at this, I really like this slide because there's a couple of key things to appreciate. One is that you see some impressive words: strategy formation, strategy translation. I've been doing this about 15 years and have done, again, several different models of strategic planning. If someone approached me on the street, a year ago and said, "Strategy translation, Steve, what is that?" I would be like, I don't really know. And so, move that stuff aside. Look at the words here. Identify the mission, vision, and values under strategy formation. External competition, market analysis, internal analysis of resources. This is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It just is. It's much more direct. Strategy translation. The goals and objective. A goal is objective, same thing. Getting into the strategy, which ones make the most sense to pursue. That's what we're talking about. Don't let these words throw you off at all. Lastly, just a few tips. You really don't need to be afraid of this. It's I think in the vast majority of instances, learn on the job kinds of training for many folks. Even in business programs, Master Health Administration programs, people don't come out of those really with any substantial experience in strategic planning. Absolutely not. So it's really through people's workplace experience. And so I encourage you to approach it, get involved, and build your own experience base over time. it won't bite. Use a guide, find someone that can help in the strategic planning process that can maybe shepherd informally, or in our case, kind of serve as a sounding board and meet with us a few times on the way through. That's really helpful. Ask for examples. Lots of other folks are doing this work in any given institution. So talk to those people about it. Look at their work products. It's not trivial. So be ready to work hard, to be diligent, to do the heavy lifting. But the upside is it's super exciting. I mean, what could be more rewarding than looking at your environment, looking at your structure, and deciding which levers to pull to accomplish your top priority goals? I mean, it really is creating your future in a lot of respects. And that's, with incoming resources that you might be granted from your organization or without. One could argue that if you're not getting much in the way of resources, all the more need to be very focused about your goals and your strategies. So with that, I will hand it off now to Imani Jones.
Thank you, Steve. Now that Steve has so wonderfully explained to us some of the nuts and bolts of strategic planning, giving us that great overview, I'll spend some time talking about what we as a department did to put many of those ideas into practice. And so the chaplaincy department, we engaged in the planning process for our strategic plan beginning in January 2014 through May of 2015. And we started implementing the strategic plan in May of 2015. And as you can see from the arrow, it's ongoing. We're not finished yet. So the first thing that we did once we identified that we would engage and embark upon the journey of a strategic plan was to lay the groundwork. So we consulted with the Medical Center Strategic Planning Department. As Hanci mentioned, we don't know anything about this. And so we knew to go to the experts to find out exactly what was involved in developing a strategic plan. We then identified champions. And so we wanted to make sure that we were connecting with individuals in leadership who could help us and who could advocate for us. In particular, we talked with and got insight from the person to whom we report in patient experience, the director, who then reports up to the chief nursing officer. And so getting that buy-in as well, making sure that they were well informed and on board so that, again, they could advocate for us and, as Steve mentioned, know our story and be able to tell our story to other senior leaders. We then formed a strategic planning team, and I have a slide coming up to show you a snapshot of what that team looked like. And then we developed a project charter, which included things like a problem statement. We wanted to be clear that we understood the problem that we wanted to address and the scope of the plan, as well as expectations. What could we reasonably expect to accomplish, as well as deliverables and a timeline, which I just shared with you. And we also sat together and developed that project charter so that we were on the same page with one another. And then we also conducted a literature review. We wanted to make sure that all around our table understood the various trends in healthcare chaplaincy. And there were members of our team who, as you'll see in a moment, weren't chaplains. So we wanted to make sure to educate them as well. And so here is what our team looked like. We had various members of our team. It was very multidisciplinary. So of course we had individuals represented who were from the chaplaincy arena, but we also wanted to make sure that we had administrators, that we had individuals who knew about data collection and research. And so we had a Muslim faith partner on our team who also worked in the medical center and had extensive research knowledge, things again that we as chaplains just didn't have. As well as a nurse manager. We wanted nursing to be represented. And this particular nurse was also a member of our pastoral care advisory committee. So in addition to those things and laying the groundwork, we thought that it would be very important, and Steve mentioned this too, to review and revise our department's vision, mission, and values. It'd been a while. We had to kind of blow the dust off of it. It'd been a while since that document was revised. And so we felt like, well, of course, now would be the time. And we also wanted to make sure that our vision, mission, and values were in alignment with the medical center's vision, mission, and values. That's very important, so that that alignment is very, very key. We also identified key consumers of services. So we had internal partners, our patients, our families, our staff members, but we also had a fair amount of external partners, so community faith partners, local seminaries who are feeders into our CPE program, as well as our CPE students. So we wanted to make sure that we understood exactly who we serve on a daily basis. We also consulted with key medical center stakeholders, as Steve mentioned again, those senior leaders, and making sure that we're getting feedback from them, that they're aware of what we're doing and how what we're doing connects again with that medical center's larger vision. And then finally, we consulted with pastoral care thought leaders. We wanted to make sure that we were asking the right questions, that we were knocking on the right doors, thinking of the right things, reviewing the right literature. And so that was very invaluable to us as well. And so after we went through the process of laying the groundwork, it was then time to start to collect data. And so we did a series of surveys to collect that information from various groups, our faculty and clinical staff here in our medical center, our CPE program, so students who were current students as well as those who were former students. And we went back several years and tried to connect with as many students as we could. We also surveyed our clergy faith partners, as Hanci mentioned. We still continue to struggle with forming those relationships and making sure those interfaces are there with our community faith leaders. And then we also did an anonymous survey of our chaplain staff. We wanted to hear from them around areas in which we can improve and the things that we should be concerned about working on. So with our clinical staff and the faculty, we use SurveyMonkey to administer a 10-question email survey, again, around what's working well, what's good, what's broken, what elements are missing, and what's effective, and what could chaplaincy look like in the future. And this was really our framework, these questions, for the other surveys that we administered with the other groups that I just mentioned. We also gave them an opportunity to write in comments, and we got a wealth of information just around the things that they appreciated about chaplaincy services, and of course, things that needed to improve. And then finally, with our data collection, we thought that it would be invaluable to do some peer benchmarking. So we identified 7 like medical centers, so large academic medical centers, and we just had dialogue and conversation with them. These were telephone interviews that ranged from an hour and a half in conversation around the things that you see on the screen, their staffing model, their CPE programming, how they decide what gets covered and by whom, their after hours coverage. Do the residents cover it like ours, or are there contingent staff? IRPs is what we call ours here. What about staff support? We learned a lot about Tea for the Soul and initiatives like that, Cope Lavender. So we wanted to hear about those things, as well as data collection and metrics, what those institutions are doing in that regard, as well as research. We know as an institution here, but also as a community of chaplains, that more and more research is becoming a part of what's required in a lot of places. And so we wanted to find out more about that as well. And so after we collected all of that data, it was time for us then to begin to engage in data mining and synthesizing. So we really needed to drill all of that data down, and we had a wealth of data. And so for our team, we created data review teams. So we had 4 data review teams, and each team was divided up in 2. So each person had a buddy. And we just reviewed all of the raw data and wanted to make sure that what we were seeing and what we were interpreting was accurate. So we took a fair amount of time to review the data and learned a lot from that data. And then after that, we created data summaries. And so all of that raw data had to be synthesized in some way. So we drilled it down into 1-page summaries, and your buddy would read the summary that you wrote to make sure that it was accurate. And so after that, we presented all of those summaries to our larger strategic planning group, and we received feedback from one another, and we made revisions from there. And when we took all of that data, and as Steve talked about earlier, we developed a SWOT analysis. And so we took all of that information and summarized it, and that really built consensus among our group, again, to make sure that we're seeing the same things, we're thinking about the same things, we're interpreting the data in a way that is accurate and makes sense. And so we created a SWOT analysis, and we reviewed the SWOT and revised the SWOT together as a strategic planning team. We had several meetings where we reviewed that data. And so after we engaged in all of those things, it was time to finalize the strategic plan. Again, this took place over the course of a little over 1 year. And so we developed goals, strategies, and tactics, which Steve mentioned. And so we just had 3 goals because, again, you don't want to have too much. You want it to be realistic. And 3 goals seem to capture all of the feedback that we received through our various surveys and our benchmarking. And so our first goal was just around offering, optimal pastoral care to patients, families, and staff. And then our second goal was to strengthen our relationships with faith leaders in the community. And then finally, we had a third goal of advancing our CPE program. We engaged in together as a group, receiving feedback from one another, and we revised. And then we began to create a prioritized list of tactics, things that we could reasonably achieve within certain time frames. We presented our final plan to key stakeholders, again, wanting to make sure that they were included in every step of the process. And we received feedback from them too around some of our goals, strategies, and tactics. And then we assigned and executed those tactics. So we brought in the larger chaplaincy staff to begin to put these things to work and put them into action. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Hanci, who will spend some time talking about the implementation phase.
Okay, thank you. So here we are now, after all that tremendous amount of work that we did, that we just felt very positive about. We were at the point now of being able to implement our plan and move forward. As you see on this slide, I'm going to talk about what we call phase 1 of our implementation. And this focus is around developing a plan for optimal pastoral care for the James Cancer Hospital. That choice of focus came about in a rather maybe serendipitous way. So I wanted to explain that. As the director of pastoral care, I had regular quarterly meetings with our chief nursing officer at the James Cancer Hospital. And when our strategic plan was completed, as Imani noted, I went to meet with him to show him the plan and talk with him about that. At that meeting, he shared that given the acuity of our James patients and the growth of the volumes of the James, it was clear to senior leaders that more support services were needed both for patients and for staff. And at that time, he basically made an invitation to me, which was if I and the staff would develop and present a plan for optimal, comprehensive pastoral care services to patients, families, and staff at the James, he would consider funding it and helping us implement it. And he also indicated at that meeting what he would need from me to gain the support for the plan that I would present. So you could imagine, I took very good notes at that meeting. And what I'd like to do now is play a brief clip for you of this chief nursing executive, his name is Chris Kipp, speaking. When we knew we were doing this webinar, I asked if he would be willing to, on camera, be interviewed and answer the following question. What would he need and expect from a pastoral care leader before he would agree to expand services and staffing? I think hearing from him is well worth our time. So we're going to play it now, again, about 3 minutes, and then I'll pick it up from there. I'm moving this mic to make sure we can kind of optimize the sound of this.
I would hold my leaders, and I do hold my leaders in our pastoral care department, equally accountable as any administrator, as any senior leader. So I would expect them to, come forward with what is happening across the nation. The whole concept, if you will, of evidence-based practice, benchmarking, what's happening across the organizations, the healthcare organizations nationally in the space of spiritual care, chaplaincy departments. So bringing forward that contemporary, that currency, that national framework, for comparison purposes. I would expect them to, come forward with a clear, concise, if you will, summary of our current state. And where do they want a vision to? So making sure that we have, accurate, if you will, summary of services that are being provided, if you will, the number of FTEs that we have, But then most important is, where do we see there's an opportunity for enhanced service? And then what would that need for additional resources, additional programming? I would expect the chaplain to be actively engaged in hospital operations, so to be sensitive to what's happening in the if you will, the entity, the organization. They need to be active at the senior operations meetings, the hospital operations meetings, where oftentimes updates are occurring specific to the activities of the hospital, the finances of the hospital, the priorities of the hospital operations. So their presence, I think, twofold. One is they're seen, and so there's a sensitivity of in the organization of how important they are, because they're actively present with all the other leaders of the hospital entity. In addition, they are receiving information, current state, accomplishments, pressures at those types of various forums. I would expect them to actively work with whoever their senior leader is that they're accountable to meet with that administrator on a regular basis and provide regular updates specific to the department, the chaplaincy, the pastoral care ministry department operations, to make sure that their senior administrators in the know and comfortable with the currency, as well as where that leader is trying to move the chaplaincy department. Oftentimes it's in those one-on-one sessions as well that the pastoral minister leader can become aware of and sensitive to priorities that are happening or challenges specific to that administrator or certainly to that hospital. Pastoral ministry is part of the greater whole, and so they have to be present with the greater whole, with that larger leadership team, to make sure that the voice of pastoral care is being heard, but then also that sensitivity and empathy about what other challenges are occurring with the other patient care service areas, whether it be social work, whether it be nursing, whether it be some of the provider departments, direct provider departments. Those large hospital operations and those one-on-one meetings are excellent forums to develop that sensitivity.
Oops.
I would hold.
All right, folks, we're having a little technical difficulty. I'm wondering if it has to end. Sorry, we're going to get out of this here. 1 second. There we go.
Go back to the slide.
I can't see. Sorry about that. There we go. Thank you. Obviously, this is not my expertise. All right, so picking up the story, I hope that was helpful for you. I think he's echoed things that we've already alluded to earlier, and maybe at the end, some of our action steps and recommendations will circle back to that. So I'm going to tell this next kind of strategic planning story briefly, because we basically did a very similar format and similar tasks to what we had done the first time. We had subcommittees and we had various areas of focus. So we tried to look at, for example, the amount of requests and the volumes of our services that were being skewed to the James, given their needs in the last past year or so. We used a staffing model called the GRASP, Pastoral Care Staffing Model, to determine minimum day shift inpatient chaplains needed. We conducted an online survey again, this time of clinical staff and faculty within the James Cancer Hospital and ambulatory clinics. We held meetings with ICU nurse managers, because there are quite a few ICU beds in the James Cancer hospitals. We also conducted benchmarking conversation, again, with comprehensive cancer centers nationally. And we conducted some phone meetings with some of our well-known pastoral care thought leaders, a few names there you'll recognize, and they were very helpful to us, as well as talking to the department directors of some of these cancer centers to get some of their input. We did an extensive literature review related to pastoral care, particularly in the oncology area, as well as around certain other keywords, spiritual needs, spiritual distress, that kind of thing. And then finally, we compared our pastoral services as we are doing them now to the APC standards of practice. We again did a very similar process that Imani described around the subcommittees, working to have their own data that they're going to issue into a kind of a summary, hearing from all of the subcommittees, sifting through all of that to kind of come up with our proposal, which again we discussed rather extensively to revise, and finally wrote it down in a proposal, a document, which was about a total of 30-some pages, with an executive summary at the top, giving our recommendations of what we felt optimal pastoral care would look like. Imani and Steve were very helpful, and again, helping give feedback and refine that document. And we submitted it to the Chief Nursing Officer in January of 2016. We met with him in March, had a extensive discussion, and our proposal, for the most part, was accepted as we proposed it. So that was obviously a tremendous gift to us and to patients and families and staff at the James. This is the outcome in terms of staffing, in terms of what changed. We were granted 9 new hires, and we wanted to show you what we felt we needed around the kinds of shifts and placements. So we had 4 inpatient chaplains for the inpatient units. We had 4 after-hours chaplains, 1 evening, 1 night, and then 2 weekend, for 1 weekend day, weekend night. And then a full-time ambulatory chaplain for one of our freestanding ambulatory centers. So those were our new hires. As it happened, we had a new hospital open, Brain and Spine Hospital, in September of 2016. And our previous request that had been written and submitted to add a chaplain for that hospital was also granted. So as it turns out, between August of 2016 and our sitting here today, we have hired 10 new chaplains for our department, which again is, we recognize such a tremendous, unusual event, but also just a tremendous blessing for us and our patients. I think now we're going to go back to Imani for a brief time.
So just to share with you some of the other outcomes, in addition to the boatload of staff that we've recently hired, we revamped our department administrative structure. So currently I'm a manager now, but we did not have a manager at all prior to the strategic plan, and realized that certain operational details could be better managed by a manager. And so here I sit in that role, and we've Hanci's role changed in the midst of the strategic plan as well to the director role that she's currently serving in. We just were able to be thoughtful about what our administrative structure should look like, given, again, our strategic plan and some of our goals listed there. Our CPE program, we were able to create some changes and expand. And so at a certain point, we were without a CPE program manager, which put a lot of pressure on the director to try to continue to have CPE programming. And so we've been able to expand that and offer a summer unit, which we weren't able to offer last summer, and also to begin to offer an extended unit in the fall. We've also were able to increase the amount of spiritual care education that we were offering for staff throughout the medical center. So we offer tons of didactics and lunch and learns and different programs, grand rounds for multidisciplinary staff here in the medical center. And we've been able to develop a great deal of staff support based on much of the feedback that we received from our strategic plan and what we incorporated into our SWOT. And so we are soon trialing Tea for the Soul. I think I mentioned that earlier. We see it so popular across the country, and so we want to get in on that. And so we have other staff initiatives that we have developed to provide additional staff support beyond the support that we give our staff every day, but some more formal programming there.
This has been terrific. Are you ready for some Q&A?
do our last summary, we'll try to click through that. We have a little recommendations for folks.
Go for it.
Our thing is freezing, however, so I'm not sure.
Try the computer.
Yeah, I'll try it on that. Okay. I'll just start talking while Imani seems that she can find the slide, but it seems like it's frozen. We wanted to give you a couple of ideas about action steps or recommendations. One is, again, seeking collaboration with other people. Don't feel like we have to do it. I think it's very important to include line staff, chaplain staff in the process of doing such a planning process. It helps them have buy-in, helps educate them, and helps them feel like it isn't coming from the top down in terms of changes that might be made. Also, I think it's, again, we've made the point probably that evidence-based data is very, very important to senior leaders. And that it's very important to align our needs, in our case, our needs for chaplains to their needs. You know, what was that going to do for the patients, for the staff? So that alignment is very important. And then finally, we thought it might be kind of a cool idea to think about folks developing a didactic for residents about the Ministry of Administration and Leadership and having some appreciation for these kinds of concepts in the future. So I think that'll do it for us in terms of some ideas for the future. So yes, questions. We can happily take questions.
Super, thanks. This was terrific. So we've got quite a few questions here. Let's see how many we can get through in the 10 minutes or so we've got. So the first question, your team strategically identified key advocates through the system by understanding the organizational strategy alignment with human resources. How did you identify those individuals, or what kinds of chemistry did you seek to find them? What challenges did you face as you were looking for them?
I don't think it was that arduous in terms of finding them. We had great leaders that I think quickly recognized the need and the benefit for the plan. So certainly starting with Hanci's boss, Amy, and Chris over at the James, the strategic planning department was, they were honest with us and said, look, we don't have enough resources to give you someone to guide the whole process through. Fortunately, I had had some experience at outside organizations before I came here, and what they did say they could do was give us this kind of sounding board, meet with us periodically, and so that worked well. I think we're still seeing the fruits of this. So one of the things that Hanci has relayed recently is the executive sponsor on the university hospital side, so not the cancer hospital side, but the university hospital side, has been asking more recently about and starting to embrace. So, it's not that it all kind of happens overnight, but I think generally people recognize the value of the department and just were real responsive to the overall initiative. So, say that we did any skillful,
maneuvering
through, or maneuvering per se.
Yeah, super. Can you flip back to the contact information screen, just because some people want to write down your contact information? And if you wouldn't mind leaning it a little bit to the mic, a couple of people are having trouble hearing. We've got a couple of questions here about metrics. So could you tell us what kinds of metrics or outcomes you used that helped you measure the impact of increasing staffing?
Well, and if we go back to find my slide here, the things that I think made the difference, to be kind of open about it, was we did keep some internal data in our own department. As I mentioned, we weren't asked, like many directors, like Steve is, to kind of keep a dashboard of things that you're constantly measuring. But we, in our own department, decided that we have a logbook. We keep track of, on-call call referrals, particularly on the after-hour shifts. So since we were keeping that anyway, we just decided to look at, well, what's different in terms of our request to the James Cancer Hospital, for example, than it was a year ago. And what we found there was something like a 200% increase in requests and referrals from the James.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, that came in very handy and I think really made a big statement. And plus it was aligned with what the senior leader at the James already knew, which was their volumes were increasing. Well, that meant it really, you know, chained down to our department. So it sort of, I think, made sense to that person that, gosh, if we're having to put so many resources to the James, then perhaps they needed to contribute to the help of staffing with that. So that's one. I would also then again encourage people to look at the GRASP staffing model. It again gives a ratio-based guidelines around how do you figure out how many chaplains do you need. Nobody knows the answer to that, of course, but there is a kind of codified way to use the average daily census as well as assess every clinical unit inpatient according to certain domains, and you can actually they have come up with sort of a figure, and that helped us as well.
So somebody was asking specifically about that GRASP model and how you applied it to spiritual care. Do you have materials you could share, or can you talk about how you applied it to spiritual care more specifically?
Well, you know, the model itself is based around pastoral care staffing. So, I mean, if that's kind of the question, yeah, so it's trying to figure out how many chaplains do we need. Now, it doesn't really, it doesn't really talk about the specific services that might, you know, be encompassed in what that chaplain is doing. But so unless I'm missing the question, it's based around chaplain staff.
Got it. I think a few people aren't sure they understand what the model is, so maybe just a few more sentences of background.
Yeah, so what you do is, again, it's a way to come up with a ratio, you know, instead of just saying, I just feel that we need more chaplains. Administrators like numbers. So you know, the article, you know, obviously one could find it and read it. I'd recommend that. But in a nutshell, you rate your clinical units around its acuity. How high is the acuity? What kind of visibility does the chaplain need? And what level of competence does the chaplain need? So obviously an ICU would be the highest acuity, need the highest visibility of a chaplain, and need your most competent chaplain. At least that would be how I would interpret it. So, you know, you kind of know that for an ICU patient, according to their ratio, for every 45 beds, one would need one chaplain. So that kind of, you know, helped us to sort of put some numbers around what's optimal for our ICUs as well as our inpatients.
Okay.
Listed. We have a resource page in the PowerPoint, so the GRASP model is listed there. So if you look at that page.
Yeah, we'll find it. Yeah, but we can send it as well. You know, we have it.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions from people asking if we could sort of gather up the resources you used, and we'd be happy to do that and somehow make them available to people. Maybe we could work on that afterwards.
Yeah.
That'd be super. A couple of questions also about how you defined world-class spiritual care, and how you, especially when your colleague was asking about, right, please describe how world-class or optimal pastoral care was defined and what kinds of metrics you used to try to measure and communicate that.
Well, what I would say is if you, again, look at all the elements of the strategic plan. So we're looking at, you know, what does the staffing, the GRASP model say is optimal? What does our survey results say is optimal? Because that was one of the questions. What does optimal pastoral care look like to you? You know, nurse by the bedside or physician. What does the ICU nurse manager say is optimal? So all of these things, looking at the benchmarking results, the phone meetings, all of that information enabled us to discuss our view of what does optimal, comprehensive, world-class mean in our setting. So I don't know that I can, you know, kind of give chapter and verse on that, other than to say it means, again, more comprehensive chaplains readily available, able to see patients. It means being involved in education. It means involved in staff support, much more than we used to be able to do. We're looking at using screening tools, which we weren't doing before. Again, the metrics of measuring what we're doing to continue to tweak it. To us, all of that sort of adds up to world class. But again, it looks a little different in a different kind of hospital that isn't an academic medical center, you know, and then research. I mean, that's still on our to-do list, but I think that would be part of our optimal pastoral care for an academic center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is super. There are a lot of questions. I think there's a lot of excitement in what you all have been doing. So maybe just to wrap up, because I'm aware of our time, for people that sort of are trying to think about whether they should get started on this, if the time is right, what do you suggest that people do next? And how did you have a sense that the time was right, or would you encourage people to think about whether the time is right?
Well, you kind of think about change. I think about CBE students. Sometimes you don't change until your suffering is big enough, or your problems are big enough. I mean, I think we kind of got to the point where we thought, boy, we're struggling all the time, and we're constantly trying to find an on-call person or get more help, or we can't answer that page the way we'd like because we don't have enough chaplains. I think when you get to a certain point, you think something needs to change. I guess that's kind of my short answer to that. So I don't know what that magical day is for everybody out there, but you kind of know when you just are not doing what you really feel like you ought to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's questions, again, there's struggles of, well, how are we going to do this? We don't have enough resources. It was just pretty obvious as somewhat an outsider. I'm the chaplaincy liaison for the James, so that's kind of how I got a seat at the table. And some of the committee meetings I could just hear, and then when I posed the question, oh, have you done strategic planning? It sounds like you're sort of at a crossroads here and not really clear what the next step should be, how you deal with these constraints, how you move beyond these constraints. And the answer was resounding no, we haven't. Tell us more, and that kind of birthed the whole thing, to be honest.
Right.
So there probably are some hazards in terms of when wouldn't be a good time. I mean, again, you need to be able to tap into some organizational resources, have the time and attention of a fair amount of people to do this successfully. So considering those things before you just jump in.
Yeah. Terrific. This has been really wonderful. I'm grateful to you, and I think we've got a lot of excitement here. A reminder to everybody listening that these slides and a recording of this webinar will be available for free, so send it to your friends on our Transforming Chaplaincy website, as well as on the ACPE website within a couple of days. Give us some time to get organized. You've got the contact information here for the presenters, so please do be in touch with them if you have additional questions. We'll be in touch with them to gather materials and figure out how to best make those materials available to you. So I'm really thankful to all of you for your interest. And I just want to remind you about our third webinar, which is very exciting. It will be in about a month. It's on Wednesday, May 17th, again at 2 o'clock. And this is a conversation with Jim Merlino. For those of you who don't know Jim, he is the President and Chief Medical Officer of Press Ganey Strategic Consulting. He was appointed the Chief Experience Officer of the Cleveland Clinic in 2009 as the second person to hold that position. He has been a speaker at the APC meeting and is a really very important person for us all to be in conversation with. Because this is going to be a conversation with him, he's not actually going to do a presentation. George Fitchett and Kevin Massey will kind of gather and ask him some questions. So send either of them or me or any of us the questions you want to ask, because we really do want to make sure to ask the questions that are on your minds. All right, so thanks again for being with us, and a big, big thank you to our presenters. I'm really, really grateful for what we've learned here together. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?